Good morning and welcome to the Point. In Lansing, they continue to try to come up with a budget, and they are talking a lot about that 45-cent a gallon gas tax increase the governor has asked for. But over in the Transportation Committee, they're talking to the experts to find out more about how they design and build roads. This morning, we'll hear from both the chairman and the vice chairman of that committee, starting with Chairman Representative Jack O'Malley. Mr. Chairman, let's talk a little bit about the approach that you're taking.
Okay.
In the 2.5 decades that I've been covering Lansing, and in those 2.5 decades they've been talking about roads, I haven't seen a committee strike out on the same type of information gathering kind of committee meetings that you've started having just this past week. I was there when you had civil engineers in. You've also had MDOT in,
Yes.
and you have other meetings planned. Tell me how that came to you, how this process started.
Well, Rick, I would say part of it is just from my background. Like you, I'm a question asker.
Right.
And an information gatherer. And as I went through talking to constituents, everybody asked the same questions. Then I talked to my colleagues on the floor, they're asking the same questions. And I thought, you know what? We need to get the facts out in front of everybody, from our fellow legislators to the people of Michigan, because there are so many misconceptions about roads. And yet we're going to have to come up with answers on how to spend this money. Well, we owe it to the people to have answers. It might be a crazy concept, but I kind of believe in it.
One of the things that I was struck by as I sat there and listened to testimony was the detail, particularly for the civil engineers, as they were talking about all of the different things that they had to consider, the amount of time it takes to design a road. So this is a long-term process. Mm-hmm. So when we see road projects that are taking place today, for example, those have been on the books for maybe up to 5 years from an MDOT perspective. Mm-hmm. So the money that is being asked, and really this all ties into that 45-cent per gallon gas tax that the governor has asked for, mm-hmm. the legislature will at some point consider. But all of that money will be pre-spent, if you will. It will take a long time for it to get in the pipeline. So part of your fact-finding is that this is not a quick fix, right?
Correct. That's the other thing. Everybody fix the roads. This is going to take a while because many of these roads that need repair, the engineers said this, depending on the fix, 5 months to 2 years just to plan it.
Right.
So that stretch of road that's in trouble right now might not get fixed for 2 years. Doesn't mean they're not working on it, but that's where I guess that fact-finding comes in. Let people know they haven't forgot about you. There's just somebody up there on a computer trying to figure out how to fix it. It just takes time.
One of the things that we spent some time on, we meaning those of us listening, hearing about drainage and all of the different things that
it's
go
exciting,
through.
isn't it?
Yeah, as I described it, it was a kind of mind-numbing detail, but all of the detail was very informative from the standpoint that who knew that you have to plan all of these different aspects, right-of-ways, traffic patterns, all of the things that you have to do in the design concept before it ever, and these aren't the people that build the roads. These, the people that I heard, were just the people that design them. So it is very complex.
Well, and another thing, yesterday when we had MDOT in, I asked this question because I'd kind of gotten wind of this. But when you're talking about the amount of money that gets spent on a road, to divert traffic, to reroute traffic around, that's expensive. That costs money, lots of money, because maybe they have to pave a shoulder that wasn't there. They've got to move things in. Then when they get this part done, they've got to move that section of road. That all costs, that all comes out of those dollars. So when people talk about where's our money being spent, why isn't it going into roads? Well, to reroute that traffic costs those dollars, and that's part of that road fix. And that's where I think that information is hugely important. We aren't wasting your dollars. MDOT isn't wasting your dollars, but to reroute you around that job costs a lot of money.
And that's one of the things that I think it may be lost in the shuffle too. It's not like anybody has done something wrong. It isn't like MDOT hasn't done their job. It isn't like somebody has purposely misappropriated funds. It is that, in fact, we have a lot of roads and a lot of them are in disrepair. So this is really a matter of catch up and figuring out how the best way to catch up is.
Yes, and how do we spend our money and why, and so that when whatever the road funding plan is, I tell people I'm not in appropriations, I'm in policy. So whatever that funding is, when we're doing it, why are we doing it the way we are and how their money's being spent? So, one of the big questions that comes up is, we need warranties. We found out we do have warranties. And here's something else. We have what's considered some of the best warranties in the country. So now when somebody comes to me and says, we need warranties, I can say, we have the best in the country. Most people, I wasn't aware of that. But when I hear from these engineers and they tell me that, now I have facts. And it's all about having facts.
When you think about, from the Transportation Committee standpoint, getting the information, as you point out, yours is not the final say when it comes to how much money goes. But you do have a big oversight position, and which is what you're doing now. When this is done in 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whenever you have these informational meetings, what do you hope that you can impart, not just to your constituents in Northern Michigan, but to your colleagues who aren't sitting in the room with you? What do you hope you can share with them?
Well, and I would say not just to my constituents everybody in the state, because we're all talking about it. I hope that what we can bring out of this is, again, facts, so that when the decisions are being made about how much we spend and what are we going to do, they're coming at it with some okay, here's how we do it. If they're making the decision because, our roads could be better if we didn't have warranties, hey, everybody, we do. I think that's important. And what do we come out of this as policy? Maybe there's a way, and I don't know, we'll find out at the end, but maybe there's some new statute or some new regulations that we can ask MDOT, say, hey, as an oversight body here, we're not telling you you're doing things wrong, but maybe you could do this a little differently, because it's been our perspective, having heard all the angles. I don't know if you can use this or want to, but one of my management styles, I was always taught, people respect what you inspect. So MDOT, we love you. Contractors, we love you. But tell us how you do things, because maybe we can have some advice on how you go about it.
I mentioned earlier you're from Northern Michigan, not because that's your only focus. As you point out, it's for the entire state. But there is something that is important about your position, and that is PA 51. Yes. You and I talked about it briefly just before we started this interview. Public Act 51 of 1951 is the distribution formula for money that comes into the Michigan Department of Transportation.
Yes.
Except that the proposal from the governor would take those extra gas tax dollars, if indeed she gets the 45 cents, and certainly the jury is still out on that, but would take that money and put it through a separate formula. Mm-hmm. As a representative, not just as the chairman of the Transportation Committee, but as a representative from up north, where tourism is extraordinarily important and good transportation facilities and roads and bridges are also important. How does that sit when you hear we're going to go around PA 51?
Well, two things. One, I think the 45-cent gas tax would disproportionately hurt people in rural Michigan, not just my district. But one of the things I'm hearing from many of the county road folks is they don't like that plan either, because no matter, PA 51 gives everybody a sense of security. They know how much money they're going to get their share, because they're setting budgets. And that new fund will be chosen. Where's that money going? We don't know. I'll be honest with you. I got a map that the governor gave all our districts, and it said eligible roads in the 101st for this fund. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Under PA 51, all roads are eligible, not just these. So I really worry about where that money is going to go, and I think we need things to be equitable. I know that's a whole nother argument, but I think PA 51 gives everybody stability. Now, the more money that goes into PA 51, the more money everybody gets.
And I should point out, we won't go through the whole formula, but it's roughly a third for the state and a third for counties, and a third
39, 39, 29.
Yeah, so that policy has been in place for a long time. As chairman of the Transportation Committee and overseeing what you are doing right now, which I refer to as a novel approach to actually find facts.
It's crazy, but I think it works.
What do you know today, warranties, for example, but what do you know today that will help you in your decision-making process going forward that you might not have known before you took this position?
Well, I think we've only heard one angle. Next week, we're going to talk to find out how state and local agencies interact with the contractors. Then in another week, we're going to talk about material and labor costs. So I think we're a little too early into this to answer that completely. But I'll give you another example. One of the reasons, probably the reason our roads are in as bad a shape as they are or are always in disrepair, it's the frost freeze. Now, people will say, everybody has frost freeze. I learned that it's worse in Michigan than anywhere because of Lake Michigan. The breezes coming off that lake are always fluctuating the temperatures. And so we have a more drastic frost freeze than other states.
At the end of this term, from your perspective, can Republicans and Democrats, the House, the Senate, the governor, can you as a group come to some sort of a solution that gives a long-term prognosis for Michigan roads? Because as I pointed out again before we started talking, one of the first stories I covered was Build Michigan 2. I think that was my second year here in covering Lansing, and that was then designed to fix the roads. I think that was 1996, and it hasn't happened yet.
I guess I'd answer that this way. You know, one thing that's important is over the last 8 years, we have been increasing road funding. And, it's a complicated discussion, but I believe that there will be more money coming into it. Will it be the 45 cents? No, I don't believe it is. A poll I saw today, people in Michigan aren't for it. So, Rick, I would say I am an optimistic guy, and I believe that we are going to come together with a good plan that will get roads fixed. People need to remember it ain't happening overnight. It's going to take time. 10 years, 15, I don't know that. But it is going to take time. So whatever we come up with, don't expect the roads to be paved with gold by next year. Just we talked about planning a fix is 2 years. So it takes time, and people need to know that. And that, again, that's why we're doing what we're doing. Get some facts out there so people understand why it works the way it does. It is complicated. It does take time. So to answer your question, I'm optimistic. You bet.
And it's not just Republicans who like the idea. When we come back, the Democratic Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. The Democratic Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee is Burton Democrat Tim Sneller. He talks about why he too thinks it's a good idea for those members of the Transportation Committee to learn more about the process of building roads. Representative, let's talk about transportation. We know that this is a hot button issue and has been for a long time. You've been in Lansing longer than I have. And I can remember Build Michigan 2 back in 96 or whenever it was. That didn't fix the roads. We've seen all of the other plans that have come along, including the plan under Governor Snyder that is putting more money into the Department of Transportation. No question about that. But it's not an overnight fix. And now this governor is looking at a larger plan to put more money in. Let's go back to your work on the Transportation Committee and talk a little bit about the process that's going on now. I was interested this week that you and the chairman had civil engineers in, you had MDOT in, and started having a conversation about how you actually build roads. And I thought that was a unique approach to actually figure out what it was that you were trying to achieve. What do you think of that process?
Oh, I think it's a great process. When Chairman O'Malley came up to me a couple weeks ago and tossed around the idea of doubling up on committee meetings to a week for the next several weeks, I jumped right on board. Talked to my caucus members. They were very enthusiastic because you got to remember, I'm going to go back to term limits because this session, I was on transportation last session, but this session we have almost half of the committee are newly elected representatives. There's many of them that were here, but they didn't serve on transportation. And I think what it is, it's a great learning experience. You know, sometimes we're in a position where, we're supposed to be a jack of all trades and master of none. But what we do when we bring in these civil engineers and we bring in the road builders and we bring in these, it tells us, this is how we do this stuff. This is why ongoing road construction, ongoing repairs are so important, because it's an educational thing. And anytime you can learn something, I think it's a wonderful experience. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of testimonies. We run about an hour and a half to 3 hours a week, plus your other committees you got to stay focused on. But I think for our members, and I know for myself, it's a learning experience. Just in the last couple days, I learned more about what goes below the road before they start building the road. So I just think it's a great learning experience.
Well, it is so complex, and I wasn't in both the sessions. I was just in the first one. But it's all of the minutia of the things that have to be done: rerouting traffic, coming up with right-of-ways, drainage, all of the things that kind of intuitively have to be done, but you don't think about how much goes into it. As you and other members become more acquainted with that process, does that give you a better feel about how to approach the funding priorities? Because once you know a little bit more about what they do, it becomes a little more clear why it is such a costly endeavor.
Right, and that is true. And what we saw in just these two brief meetings is that what we saw is the complexity that goes involved. And let me use an example, because I didn't ask the question in committee. We were running late, but I did speak to one of the civil engineers that night. And I said to him, there's this spot on I-69 just west of M52, which is Perry. And I said, of course, I've been doing this commute to Lansing for 30 some years. I've commuted so long here that 69 used to end at 52. Seriously, we took the back way in. But anyways, as you go westbound into Lansing on 69, about a mile and a half past the M52, there's these two signs, and it says rough road. I don't know if you ever passed it, but what you do is it dips. And I asked him, I said, when we're doing this, and you talked about, wetlands, you talked about all these designs that you guys do, what is wrong with that part of that it can't be fixed in 6-7 years? And he said it was built on wetlands. And they evidently brought in tons and tons of sand and soil to build that up just to where it is. But look what's happened over the course of the last maybe 25 years, 30 years that 69's been open up through there. It has sunk back down. So it's a constant thing in Michigan that we, especially with our road conditions, we have a unique situation here in Michigan where, we have to plow the highways. States in the south, states in the southwest, they don't have to do all that stuff. Put salt on the roads. Many of them put sand on the roads, to keep them safe during the winter months. So we have a unique situation here. But and the other part of that too is the materials we use. I hear that all the time. Why don't we use better materials? Why don't we use things that will be long-term? Well, we have those elements, as I just mentioned, with road conditions and climates. And the other thing that was really fascinating about that is we hear so many times, why don't we have warranties? When a road builder comes in and we spend, hundreds of $millions on that roads, and 3-4 years later it's in bad condition, and to be informed that we do actually have warranties. That was really new to me. I knew we had them, but I didn't know the intensity of those warranties, that we expect these road builders to build a road that lasts 5 years, that lasts 10 years. Yeah, that's very important.
The interesting part about that first committee hearing that you had with the engineers was all of what you just described, all of the different questions that each of the members asked, and I thought it was instructive. They said, look, here's what I'm hearing. They weren't asserting themselves that they believed that those were problems, but this is what their constituents are hearing. Now they're armed with the information that they can work with their constituents. So part of this process, yes, is to make sure that you as legislators have a firm grasp of what the process is, but it's also to transfer it back to the people back home, because they, at the end of the day, are the ones who are going to be asked to foot the bill.
That's right. And if I could just answer that, my first 2 years I was here, I had 92 coffee hours. I think it's so important that you be accessible to those that elect you and those that represent you. And that was the biggest thing. When I knocked on doors in 2016, let me back up. Education, roads, and water, because of the Flint water crisis, because I border the city of Flint, were the top items. Now, let me tell you, there's two now. And because we gave a little bump to education last year, still not enough, and that's another issue for another day. But right now, when I have my coffee hours this year, or this term, the two main factors, auto no fault and roads. And they go hand in hand, really, because look how many people have car damage off the roads. I had a flat tire in Grand Blanc. I hit a pothole and had a flat tire.
Where are we? And I didn't set up your background, and for people watching who may not have met you, you have worked in this institution in one form or another, as you said, for 30 years.
Yes.
And so you've been here for all the discussions about roads. You've seen taxes raised and cut. You've seen them changed, renamed, all of the things that happen in Lansing. We now know that the governor has her plan on the table. It's the only plan, as you pointed out, going into this. There may be others that come about.
Right.
But right now, I mean, we're quite a ways into this session without having real budget movement. So something needs to start happening, I would guess, relatively soon. With the governor's ask at 45 cents per gallon additional tax, where is that process? Republicans certainly haven't. Some have said it's a non-starter, others haven't bought into it. Is there progress being made in that conversation, or is everybody still just talking?
Well, if I can use the Senate Majority Leader, who I respect, Senate Majority Leader Shirkey, he said it had zero chance.
Right.
Well, then we have Speaker Chatfield that said it had a 1%. So that's one bump up. So I'm optimistic that we recognize we got to fix the roads. I mean, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, Democrats, it doesn't matter. This goes across the spectrum. You know, tourism is one of our largest industries. And one of the things that we hear, but it ought to be a shared responsibility. I mean, in 2015, I was here as a staffer when we passed the gas tax. It was 7.3 cents. We raised it. We brought the diesel tax to parity with the gas tax. But then we also added on a 20% registration fee increase. Some of that hasn't even taken full impact yet. So there's still going to be money that's going to be coming in on that. But it was never enough. Under Engler, when I was here working in the Senate, he had a gas tax. And it's like, especially in this age of term limits, we put a Band-Aid on it, it seems like, until I'm out of here. And like you said earlier, you know, you're long gone after 3 or 4 years. Nobody remembers you anyways.
Right.
But that's how we tried to do it. Okay, here's a 5-year fix. Maybe that's what we did in 2015. It was never enough. And let me say one thing that people don't realize. In 2015, if you Google it, of course, I was here live, gas was $1.86 in Michigan. If you were going to raise and be serious about it, that would have been the time to raise it sufficiently where it could sustain long-term funding and repairs, rather than wait till it's $3. That's the pushback I get. In my coffee hours, I have a lot of UAW retirees that live in the city of Burton. That's one of their concerns. They're on a fixed income. You know, this 45 cents, they say it could be $25 a month, maybe 30, depending on how much you drive. And many of them are snowbirds and they go to Florida. But that's a lot out of their fixed income. I mean, they don't get raises like, you know, many in the private sector or whatever. They're on a fixed income. They get Social Security and then they get a small General Motors pension. And to them, that $25 could mean a drug prescription. That could mean some groceries. To them, they take that. But they also understand, by working for General Motors and working in the auto industry, that we need good roads. They understand. I mean, I've had some of them tell me, why can't we do it 10 cents? Well, 10 cents is kind of doing what we did 4 years ago, and that's why we're back in the situation we're in.
When you think about this, and I'll make this my last question. I ask you because you have the advantage of perspective over the years. When you look back to when gas was $1.86, and it might have been easier to raise that tax higher. It would have also been a lot easier when you controlled both houses and the governor's office. And today, that's not the case. Republicans control the House and Senate, Democratic governor. That complicates the matter, doesn't it?
Oh, it sure does. But one thing it does do, and we talked about this prior to this, it makes us compromise. And somehow that's just become a dirty word. So when you got a governor that's got the veto pen, and you got a legislature that's controlled by the other party, it does make us at least talk to each other. And I think through these committee meetings, we're talking to each other. We're listening to the experts. And that's always a good thing.
We'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. So the budget process continues in Lansing. So does the conversation about a gas tax increase. Now we're even talking about how to build roads. We'll continue to follow this when you join us next week. To the Point.